The morning sun came slowly through the thin curtains, casting soft lines of light across the small living room. The place was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock, which seemed louder than it should be. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor as if it held all the answers. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and dust, a mixture that reminded him of mornings he used to enjoy but had long forgotten. Life had become a series of routines, small, predictable steps that carried him from one day to the next, without excitement or surprise. He had worked in the same office for years, and the days had all begun to feel the same. Wake up, brush teeth, pour coffee, walk to the train station, sit in a cubicle, check emails, attend meetings, go home, eat dinner, sleep, and repeat. On weekends, he stayed home mostly, sometimes wandering to the small park nearby or to the grocery store. But even those small adventures felt empty. People around him seemed busy chasing something, yet he felt invisible in the crowd, a shadow that passed unnoticed. Music used to fill his life once. When he was younger, he had spent hours at the piano in the corner of his childhood home, letting his fingers wander across the keys without care. Those days felt like a different life now. The notes he had once played with passion had faded into memory. Every time he thought about touching a piano again, it felt like reaching for a distant star. The thought both thrilled and frightened him. What if the magic he remembered no longer existed? He had friends, but their calls had become infrequent. Everyone seemed busy building their own stories while he watched quietly from the sidelines. Social media showed snapshots of laughter, trips, celebrations, while he sat alone, wondering when the last time was that he had felt truly alive. The apartment felt bigger than it should, the walls filled with echoes of silence. Books and photographs lined the shelves, each item holding fragments of memories that now seemed like someone else's life. That morning, as he sipped his coffee and stared at the quiet room, a strange feeling began to rise in his chest. It was subtle at first, like a whisper of wind, but it grew stronger. A sense that something small, something unexpected, could change the way he saw the world. He shook his head slightly, trying to dismiss it. It had been years since anything had surprised him. Life had grown predictable, safe, and a little dull. He wondered if he had become too afraid to feel anything deeply again. The day passed slowly. Work was the same as always, numbers and reports, emails that required answers but never held meaning. He walked back home in the evening, the city lights flickering on one by one, reflecting on the quiet streets. A few people walked past, chatting and laughing, but it felt like a different world from the one he lived in. He looked at their smiles and wondered if he would ever feel that freely again. At home, he opened a small drawer in the corner of the living room. Inside was a thin layer of dust covering what he had kept for years, a collection of old sheet music. Memories of times when his heart had moved to the rhythm of notes and melodies. He picked up a page carefully, tracing the lines with his finger. The music looked familiar, almost alive. His fingers itched to play, but he hesitated, uncertain if he still had the courage to bring sound into the empty room. It was as if the music waited for permission to return, waiting for him to believe it could still matter. He set the sheet music down gently and sank back into the couch. The ticking of the clock seemed louder now, marking time that felt heavier, slower. He closed his eyes and let his mind wander to memories of sitting at the piano as a child. The sound of his own hands making music, the way it seemed to speak even when words failed. Those moments were filled with joy, a pure kind of happiness that he had long forgotten. Yet thinking about them made his chest ache, reminding him how far away that feeling had become. A soft breeze came through the open window, carrying the smell of rain that had fallen the night before. It rustled the papers on the table and lifted the thin curtains slightly. For a moment, he imagined someone playing outside, the sound of a piano drifting in from a nearby apartment or studio. He shook his head, thinking it was just a dream, but a small spark had been lit inside him. A feeling he had almost forgotten, a tiny hope that something could break the monotony, that something could reach him in a way words never could. The evening deepened, and the city settled into a softer rhythm. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, and the distant hum of traffic created a background melody of its own. He sat quietly, thinking about life, about missed opportunities, about the music he had once loved. It was a peaceful sadness, not bitter or angry, just reflective. He realized that even in quiet moments, even in routines that felt endless, life had small pockets of possibility. He just needed something to awaken them as he prepared for bed. He glanced at the corner of the room where the piano used to be in his childhood home, a space now empty but still alive in his memory. The thought of sound lingered in his mind, delicate and inviting. He wondered if it would ever reach him again, if a single note could touch the parts of his heart that had grown silent. That night, sleep came slowly, but the thought of music stayed with him. A gentle presence that hinted at change, at possibility, at life beyond routine. He woke the next morning with a sense that something was about to happen, though he could not name it. Life felt slightly more alive, as if the world was waiting for him to notice something important. He moved through the day, as usual, but each moment felt lighter, each sound a little sharper, each color a little brighter. The memory of music lingered in his mind, not as a dream, but as a promise. Something small, something beautiful, could reach him, and he would recognize it when it came. That small hope stayed with him, like a quiet whisper guiding him towards something he could not yet see, but knew was real and waiting. The next morning began like any other, with the pale sunlight creeping through the window and the quiet ticking of the old clock. But today, something felt different. He could not say what it was, only that the air seemed a little heavier, the sounds around him a little sharper. He moved through his morning routine almost mechanically, but each step felt slightly more alive, as if the world were trying to speak to him. To shake him from the monotony of his own life, he left the apartment earlier than usual, taking a route he rarely used. The streets were calm, wet from the early mist, the smell of rain still lingering in the air. People walked quickly past him, their faces set and serious, but for some reason, he noticed them more today. He noticed the way a man's scarf fluttered in the wind, the soft rhythm of a woman's footsteps on the wet pavement, the distant hum of a car engine that reminded him of the heartbeat of the city. It was as if the world had turned its volume up just a little, and he was finally listening. As he walked past a small alley, he noticed a narrow doorway slightly open. He had never seen it before, and curiosity tugged at him. Inside, light spilled from an old window, casting a warm glow onto the wet pavement outside. He stepped closer and hesitated, peering inside. There, in the quiet corner of a small room, was a piano. Its wooden body was polished but worn in places, and the keys gleamed faintly under the soft light. Then it happened. A single note rang out. It was soft at first, tentative, almost hesitant. But it had a clarity that cut through the ordinary noises of the street. The sound seemed to reach inside him, brushing against memories he had long tucked away. He stopped walking, frozen. The note held a kind of magic, a warmth that was almost painful in its beauty. His chest tightened and he felt a lump in his throat. He had not realized how much he had missed this, the sound, the music, the way it could touch the soul. He pressed his face closer to the doorway, trying to see who was playing, but the room was empty. The note lingered in the air, and for a moment, the world outside faded. He could hear the soft creak of the piano pedal, the delicate movement of fingers across the keys. And then, as if the piano itself had a voice, the note seemed to speak to him. It spoke of hope, of loss, of longing, and of something beautiful waiting just beyond reach. He felt tears welling up in his eyes, though he did not move or make a sound. For several minutes he stood there, absorbing the single note. Each vibration seemed to stir something deep within him, awakening memories of days spent at the piano, of music flowing freely through his hands and heart. He remembered the joy he had felt, the way music had once been a friend and a companion, and he realized painfully how far he had drifted from that part of himself. The note was a gentle reminder of what he had lost, but it was also an invitation, a soft call to return. He stepped into the doorway slowly, hesitant, as if crossing the threshold would somehow change the magic of the moment. The room was small and simple, with light streaming through a dusty window and reflecting on the polished wooden floor. The piano sat against the wall, silent now as if it had been waiting for him all along. He reached out to touch the keys, and they felt familiar under his fingertips. The memory of their feel, the weight of each key, the way they responded to touch, all came rushing back. His heart raced, and he took a deep breath, unsure if he was ready to play again. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding in the little room. People passed by, rushing to work or errands, while he lingered in a moment that felt suspended in time. He sat on the piano bench, letting his fingers hover over the keys, listening to the echo of the single note that had drawn him here. It was as if the note had opened a door in his mind, a door that he had almost forgotten existed. He pressed a key lightly, almost tentatively, and a sound rang out, not as perfect as he remembered, but beautiful in its honesty. The piano seemed to respond to him, welcoming him back into its world. He played another note, and then another, the music slowly building, filling the small room with a warmth that he had not felt in years. Each note was a step, a small reclaiming of something he had thought lost forever. Time passed differently in that room. Minutes stretched into hours, though he did not notice. The outside world, the routines, the stress, everything else faded away. He was present only in the music, in the sound that reached into him and stirred feelings he had almost forgotten. The single note that had drawn him in became a river of sound, flowing through him, washing away the dust of ordinary days and leaving something alive, something real. He paused occasionally, taking deep breaths, letting the echoes of the piano fill the quiet room. He thought about the years he had spent away from music. It's about the fear that had held him back, about the routines that had numbed him. And he realized that it was never too late to feel, never too late to return to the things that truly mattered. The single note had been a key unlocking a door, and now that door was open. The evening light shifted, casting long shadows across the room. He kept playing, lost in the sound, until the first stars appeared in the sky outside. The city hummed softly beyond the walls, but here in this small room there was only the piano and him. The single note that had reached his soul had grown into a melody that carried him through memories, through emotions, through the quiet spaces of his heart. It was a sound that reminded him that life, even in its quiet, ordinary moments, could still hold wonder. When he finally stood, his hands tingling from the touch of the keys, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, a connection to a part of himself he had almost forgotten. The single note that had reached him had awakened something inside, a spark that would not easily fade. He left the room slowly, closing the door gently behind him, carrying the warmth of the music with him into the cool evening air. He walked home with a lightness in his step he had not felt in years. The streets seemed different now, familiar yet alive, each sound sharper, each color brighter. He thought about the single piano sound, how it had stopped him in his tracks and changed something inside him. He realized that even small moments, even a single note, could reach the deepest parts of the soul if only one was willing to listen. That note, that moment, was a beginning. And he knew he would never see the world quite the same way again. Back in his apartment, he could still hear the echo of the piano in his mind. It lingered there, a gentle reminder that life held beauty, waiting quietly for those who were ready to hear it. He sat by the window, watching the lights of the city, feeling a new kind of hope. The single piano sound had found him, and now, for the first time in years, he felt that perhaps something extraordinary could happen. Even in the ordinary rhythm of everyday life, the next few days after the piano encounter felt strange, almost magical. He could not stop thinking about the single note that had reached him, and the melody that had followed. Every sound in his life seemed sharper now, more meaningful. Even the ticking of the old clock in his apartment, which had once felt so loud and monotonous, now had a rhythm, a pulse that reminded him of the piano keys he had touched. He found himself humming softly to himself while walking to work. Letting the memory of music drift through his mind, he began to notice little things he had ignored for years. The way sunlight filtered through the windows, the smell of wet earth after a rain, the laughter of children in the park. They all seemed connected somehow, like threads in a tapestry he had almost forgotten existed. The piano sound had awakened something inside him, something that had been dormant for years. It was a quiet, persistent feeling that life was larger than routines. It's more colorful than dull walls and empty rooms. At work, he found himself distracted. His eyes wandered from the screen to the world outside, noticing small gestures and patterns he had missed before. He caught a coworker smiling at a joke he had missed, and the sound of her laugh felt warmer than he remembered. The rhythm of his day, once mechanical and uninspired, now carried a kind of hidden music. It was not the same as the piano, but it was alive in its own way, and he found it comforting, like a soft echo of the notes that had touched him. One evening, he returned to the small room where the piano had waited. The narrow doorway felt familiar now, almost like a friend opening its arms to him. The piano sat there silently, polished and patient. He sat down, letting his fingers hover above the keys. Memories of his younger days came rushing back, hours spent pressing keys. Feeling the music flowed through him, losing himself in the sound until the world faded away. The piano had been a companion, a confidant, a voice for everything he could not say aloud. He pressed a key lightly, listening to the sound, and then another, and then another. The music came slowly at first, hesitant, like a bird learning to fly again. But soon it grew stronger, more confident, carrying with it the emotions he had kept locked away for years. Each note brought a memory, a feeling, a moment of life he had forgotten. He remembered the joy of creating, the sadness of loss, the thrill of discovery, and the quiet contentment of simply being. The music became a bridge, connecting the past and the present, allowing him to feel fully alive again. As he played, he thought about all the moments he had let slip by. He remembered people he had lost touch with, chances he had not taken, dreams he had set aside. There was regret, of course, a sharp and bitter taste, but there was also gratitude. Gratitude for the music, for the piano, for the single note that had found him when he had not even been looking. He realized that even though he had lost time, it was never too late to reclaim parts of himself that had been forgotten. The music carried him through a journey of memory. He remembered his first piano lesson, the nervous excitement of touching the keys for the first time. He remembered the small victories, the first song he had learned to play without mistakes, the encouragement of a teacher who had believed in him when he did not believe in himself. He remembered the late nights spent practicing, the hours of solitude that felt both lonely and comforting. Each note now carried the weight of those memories, bringing them to life in a way words never could. He also remembered the losses. Friends who had moved away, family who had drifted apart, opportunities he had missed because of fear or hesitation. Those memories brought tears to his eyes, but they were not bitter tears. They were cleansing tears, tears that allowed him to acknowledge the past without being trapped by it. The piano had become a witness to his life, listening to his joys and sorrows, reflecting them back in sound and harmony. As he continued to play, he began to notice something more. The music was no longer just a reflection of the past. It was a guide to the present. Each note seemed to offer insight, clarity, a sense of direction. He felt as if the piano was speaking to him, not with words, but with the language of the heart. It told him to pay attention, to notice, to feel, to live fully in each moment. The melody was gentle but insistent, reminding him that life was happening now, that he could still participate, still create, still connect. Hours passed unnoticed. The light in the small room shifted from soft daylight to the warm glow of evening. He finally stopped playing, leaning back on the bench, letting the silence wrap around him. The room felt alive, not because of the piano alone, but because of him, because of the way he had let himself be touched, moved, awakened. The single note that had reached him had sparked a fire that would not easily be extinguished. He walked home slowly that evening, carrying the music with him in his mind. Each step felt deliberate, each breath filled with awareness. He thought about the world outside, about the people he passed, about the beauty hidden in ordinary moments. The music had changed the way he saw everything. Life was no longer a series of routines. It was a canvas waiting for color, a story waiting to be told, a melody waiting to be played. At home, he found himself reflecting on the past and imagining the future. He thought about reconnecting with people he had lost touch with, about pursuing small dreams he had abandoned, about allowing himself to feel deeply again. The piano had taught him that it was possible to reclaim what had been lost, to heal from what had been hurt, to open the heart to beauty and possibility. He realized that the journey he had begun with a single note was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with sound, emotion, and life. As he lay in bed that night, he could still hear the echoes of the piano. They were not just sounds. They were reminders, guides, companions in the quiet darkness. The single note that had reached his soul had awakened memories, emotions, and dreams. It had reminded him of who he was and who he could still become. Sleep came slowly, but when it came, it was filled with a sense of peace and anticipation. He knew that tomorrow and every day after, the music would continue to guide him, to teach him, to reach the deepest parts of his heart. The piano had become more than an instrument. It, plus, had become a part of his life, a voice for his soul, a reminder that even the smallest sound could carry immense power. Days turned into weeks, but the single piano sound that had first reached him never left his mind. It had become part of his daily thoughts, a quiet reminder that life could still surprise him, that beauty could still enter even the most ordinary day. He carried a new awareness now, noticing moments that had once passed unnoticed. A bird landing on a branch outside his window, the way sunlight reflected off puddles after rain, the soft laughter of strangers passing on the street. Each small detail seemed like a tiny note in a larger melody, a world alive with rhythm and possibility. He found himself returning to the small room with the piano more often. At first, it was just to touch the keys, to let the memories and emotions flow. But over time, he began to linger longer, exploring melodies he had once played with ease. At first, he made mistakes, hitting wrong notes, the music faltering, but he no longer felt shame or fear. Each mistake was just part of the process, part of learning to feel again, to reconnect with the part of himself that had been asleep for years. The piano welcomed him, patient and steady, never judging, always ready for the next note. Outside, the world continued in its usual pace, but he no longer felt invisible in it. He smiled at people on the street. He noticed faces, gestures, the subtle expressions that told stories. He began small conversations with neighbors, with the barista at his coffee shop, even with strangers on the train. The piano had taught him something important: to listen, not just with ears, but with heart. Life was full of sounds, not just music. And each sound could reach him if he was willing to pay attention. At work, he noticed changes too. He listened more carefully to his colleagues, understanding their moods, their unspoken thoughts. He began to offer help without being asked, to share small words of encouragement. People started to notice, and some even smiled at him, a small warmth that spread in his chest. The music had given him more than melodies. It had given him patience, empathy, a sense of presence he had long lost. He realized that change did not have to be loud or dramatic. It could start quietly in small actions and small choices. At home, he began to create little rituals that connected him to the music he had rediscovered. Mornings now began with a few moments at the window, listening to the city, hearing the subtle melodies hidden in everyday life. Evenings were often spent at the piano, letting his fingers wander over the keys, playing music for himself, letting the room fill with sound. The world outside could remain busy, noisy, indifferent, but here he felt alive, complete, present. He realized that happiness did not have to come from grand events. It could come from noticing feeling and creating in the simplest of ways. He also began reconnecting with parts of his past he had neglected. Old friends received letters, messages, or phone calls. Some replied immediately, eager to hear from him. Others were slower, distant, but each connection mattered. He started visiting places he had avoided, places that held memories both painful and joyful. The music had given him courage, a reminder that even old wounds could heal if faced gently, if allowed space and care. It was not a sudden transformation, but a quiet evolution, steady and patient. One afternoon, he walked through a park he had visited as a child. He watched families laughing, dogs running, children chasing birds, and felt a deep sense of belonging. The memory of the piano note that had reached him came back, and he realized that the world itself was full of such notes moments that could awaken, heal, and inspire if only one was open to them. He felt gratitude, a warm presence that filled the spaces where emptiness had lived before. He began keeping a journal, not just of music, but of life itself. He wrote about the small joys, the tiny victories, the moments of clarity and beauty. Each page became a reflection of his awakening, a record of a heart learning to feel fully again. The act of writing, like playing the piano, became a form of meditation, a way to process emotions and understand his own journey. He discovered that creativity was not limited to music. It was in noticing, in thinking, in expressing oneself in ways that brought meaning to life. Evenings became times of reflection. When he would sit by the window or at the piano and think about the changes he had undergone, he realized that life was no longer just a routine of work, meals, and sleep. Each day offered opportunities, chances to notice, to connect, to create. He no longer feared the silence or the ordinary moments. He embraced them, understanding that within them lay the potential for discovery, for beauty, for joy. The single piano sound had taught him to see beyond the surface, to listen deeply, and to engage fully. The world outside remained busy, different, as always, but he no longer felt trapped by it. He moved through the streets with awareness, noticing patterns, rhythms, and melodies in everyday life. Conversations, footsteps, laughter, even the hum of traffic became part of the music that now filled his world. He discovered that life itself was an orchestra, and he was learning to be both a listener and a participant, contributing his own notes and rhythms as weeks turned into months. He noticed a subtle transformation in himself. He was calmer, more patient, more connected to the present. He had begun to care for his body and mind, taking walks, eating mindfully, and allowing himself rest without guilt. The piano had not only awakened emotions, but it also opened the door to a healthier, more balanced life. He realized that change did not need to be abrupt or dramatic. Small steps taken consistently could shift everything over time. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, he sat at the piano and played for hours. The music flowed effortlessly, carrying with it emotions, memories, and dreams. He realized that the piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a teacher, a guide, a mirror, reflecting the growth he had experienced. Each note, each pause, each rhythm became a conversation with himself, a dialogue that brought clarity and peace. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the single note that had begun it all, a reminder that even the smallest sound could reach the soul and spark profound change. The journey was ongoing, and he knew there would still be challenges and moments of doubt, but he no longer feared them. He had learned to listen, to feel, and to act with awareness. Life had become a series of meaningful moments, each one an opportunity to connect, to create, and to grow. As night fell, he closed the piano and walked to his window, looking out over the city lights. The world was still busy, still moving fast, but he felt a deep connection to it. He realized that the piano had taught him more than music. It had taught him how to live fully, to notice deeply, and to embrace the beauty hidden in ordinary life. The single piano sound had reached him, but it had also opened the door for countless other moments, countless other melodies that would continue to guide him on his journey of life, awakening and self-discovery. Life had changed quietly, but profoundly. The single piano note that had first reached him weeks ago had become more than a memory. It had become a part of his life, a reminder that even the smallest moments could hold enormous meaning. Each day now carried the potential for discovery, for connection, and for a quiet joy that had once seemed impossible. He felt a sense of balance and peace he had not known in years, a calm awareness that life was happening fully and deeply. Even in ordinary moments, he continued his visits to the small room with the piano, but now the purpose had evolved. At first, it had been about reclaiming the music he had lost, about remembering who he had been. Now, it was about exploring who he could become. letting the piano guide him through new melodies, new emotions, and new understandings. Each time he played, the music reflected a part of his journey, notes of hope, chords of reflection, rhythms of change. He no longer played perfectly, but each sound carried meaning, honesty, and emotion, which was far more important. The world outside seemed to shift in response to his inner change. He noticed people in ways he never had before. A woman feeding birds in the park, a child chasing bubbles, a street musician playing a violin. They were all small melodies in a larger symphony of life. He would smile at strangers and often receive smiles in return. The small gestures that had once gone unnoticed now felt like threads connecting him to the world. It was as if the music had taught him to see, really see, and to hear, really hear, the hidden beauty all around him. He also began reconnecting with people from his past. Old friends, colleagues, even distant relatives received his messages. Some were surprised, some hesitant, but each conversation reminded him that human connection, like music, could heal and awaken. He realized that the piano note that had reached him was not only about music. It was about life, about opening the heart to moments of meaning, about engaging with the world rather than observing it from a distance. Each conversation, each small act of kindness, became another note in the symphony he was composing in his life. At work, he noticed a difference too. Tasks that once felt mundane now carried purpose. He listened more carefully, offered help without being asked, and engaged with colleagues in ways that were thoughtful and meaningful. The music had taught him patience and awareness, and these qualities extended into his interactions. He began to see that life was composed not just of extraordinary events, but also of small, consistent actions that built trust, connection, and respect. He was still the same person outwardly, but inwardly he was changing in ways that mattered deeply. Evenings remained his favorite time. He often sat by the piano, letting his fingers explore new melodies. But now he also began to play for others. He would invite a neighbor, a friend, or even a stranger passing by to listen. He discovered that music had the power to reach beyond his own heart, touching others in ways words could not. Some listeners were moved to tears, others smiled quietly. But each response reminded him that the piano sound that had first reached him could continue to ripple outward, touching lives in unseen and unexpected ways. The music also led him to explore creativity beyond the piano. He began keeping a journal, writing not just about music, but about life, observations, and emotions. Each entry became a melody of words, a reflection of the growth he had experienced. Writing allowed him to process feelings that had once been confusing or overwhelming. It reminded him that creativity was not limited to one medium. It could exist in thought, action, observation, and interaction. Music had opened a door, and now other doors were appearing, each offering a new perspective, a new experience, a new way to connect. Over time, he noticed that his perception of challenges had shifted. Problems that once caused stress or anxiety now seemed manageable, even opportunities for growth. The music had taught him patience, the power of listening, and the value of presence. He began to approach difficulties with a calm determination, understanding that even obstacles carried lessons and even mistakes held value. Life, like music, had rhythms, pauses, and shifts, and he was learning to move with them rather than against them. He found joy in simple routines now, noticing beauty in everyday tasks. Making coffee, walking through the park, watching the sunset all became moments of reflection and gratitude. The piano note had shown him that life's richness was not always in grand events, but often in subtle, fleeting moments that required attention and care. Each day offered notes that could be woven into a larger harmony if only he was willing to pause and listen. One rainy afternoon, returned to the small room with the piano, feeling a deep sense of connection. The rain tapped softly on the window, a rhythm that blended with the music he played. Each note was deliberate, thoughtful, filled with intention. He reflected on how far he had come from a life of routine and silence to one full of awareness, presence, and connection. The single piano note that had reached him seemed distant now, yet its impact was profound, echoing in every choice, every thought. Every sound he made as he played, he imagined the lives of others. Wondering how music, attention, and care might touch them, he realized that the piano had given him not only personal awakening, but also a sense of responsibility to listen, to act, to share. He understood that beauty and meaning could spread, like ripples across a pond, reaching further than one could ever see. The music had become a bridge, connecting him not only to himself, but also to the world beyond his own walls. Evenings often found him sitting quietly after playing, absorbing the residual sounds, letting the silence speak as loudly as the music. He reflected on the lessons he had learned, that patience could bring insight, that attention could reveal hidden beauty, that small actions could change a life. He had learned to embrace uncertainty, to find comfort in process rather than result, and to recognize that transformation often came quietly, step by step, note by note. In the months that followed, he noticed that the changes in him were not fleeting. They had become part of who he was. His life had not become perfect or free of challenges, but it had gained depth, awareness, and purpose. The piano sound that had first reached him had done more than awaken a memory of music. It had awakened his capacity to live fully, to notice, to connect, to create, and to care. It had given him the courage to embrace life, even in its ordinary and unpredictable moments. On a quiet evening, he walked through the city streets, listening to the rhythm of footsteps, the murmur of conversation, the distant hum of traffic. Everything seemed alive, part of a larger symphony of existence. He paused by a fountain, watching the water ripple and sparkle, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The piano note that had reached him had set a journey in motion, a journey of awareness, growth, and connection that would continue for the rest of his life. He returned home that night, carrying the sounds and lessons of the day with him. Sitting at the piano, he played again, letting the music flow naturally, intuitively, as a reflection of all he had learned and experienced. The room filled with warmth and light, a mirror of the life he had rebuilt. He understood now that the single piano sound was never just a sound. It was a spark, a reminder, a guide, a promise that life could always offer beauty, connection, and hope if one was willing to listen. As sleep approached, he closed the piano and sat by the window for a moment, watching the stars. The world was quiet, yet full of life and possibility. He realized that he was ready for whatever came next, knowing that each day, each moment, each sound could hold meaning. The single piano note had reached his soul, and in doing so it had taught him to reach back, to embrace life fully, to listen, to feel, to live with openness, courage, and heart. That sound, once small and fleeting, had become eternal within him, a guiding melody that would accompany him forever. Shaping the rhythm of a life awakened and alive, life continued, but now it had a new rhythm. The single piano sound that had first reached him had already changed everything. But he discovered that transformation was not a one-time event. Each day offered new lessons, new moments, and new melodies to explore. He had learned to listen to the world, to feel deeply, and to notice even the smallest wonders. And he realized that growth was a journey without end. The piano remained a constant companion, a guide, and a source of reflection. But life itself had become a symphony of experiences waiting to be acknowledged. He began to integrate music into more areas of his life. At work, he found subtle ways to bring the awareness he had gained into daily interactions. Conversations with colleagues became more meaningful. He learned to notice tone, expression, and mood, responding with empathy and understanding. Projects that once felt tedious now had a rhythm of their own. He approached problems with patience, listening before acting, understanding that solutions often emerged when one was present and attentive. Music had taught him patience and presence, and he realized these qualities could transform even the most ordinary work into something significant at home. He created small rituals that kept him connected to the piano and to life's moments of beauty. Mornings might begin with sunlight streaming through the window, coffee in hand, and a few notes played on the piano. Evenings were often spent reflecting on the day, listening to the city outside, or writing in his journal. Each act, no matter how small, was a deliberate way of embracing life, conscious acknowledgement that the ordinary could be extraordinary if approached with awareness and care. The piano, once a symbol of past memories, had become a tool for living fully in the present. One day, he decided to visit a local music school. He had never shared his journey with anyone outside the piano room, but something in him now wanted to connect with others through the music that had changed his life. The school welcomed him, and he observed students learning, struggling, and discovering their own love for music. Watching them reminded him of himself, of the days he had spent learning to play, the moments of joy and frustration that had shaped him. He realized that music was not just a personal journey. It was a universal language, capable of reaching souls in ways words could not. He began volunteering occasionally, helping students understand the basics, encouraging them to feel the music rather than just play the notes. It was a small gesture, but one that brought him profound satisfaction. He saw faces light up when a student hit a chord correctly, felt the quiet gratitude in their eyes, and realized that sharing music allowed him to multiply the impact of the single note that had once reached him. The sound that had awakened his soul could now extend into the lives of others, creating ripples of awareness, connection, and joy outside the music school. The world continued in its usual pace, but he no longer felt disconnected. He observed life with curiosity and warmth, noticing patterns, rhythms, and subtleties that had once gone unseen. Street sounds, footsteps, laughter, conversations, the rustling of leaves all became part of an ongoing symphony. He walked through parks, streets, and markets with heightened awareness, finding joy and beauty in moments that had once seemed mundane. Each sound, each sight, became a note in the larger melody of life, a reminder that beauty could be found everywhere if one was willing to listen.